Mr. President, dear Martin, ladies and gentlemen, impressed by the strong words of the President of the European Parliament, and also wanting to thank the Stiftung for organizing this, a very important, high-relevant topic to talk about. In my entire political life, I've been fighting for freedom, democracy, human rights, and tolerance. And those are values very proudly defended by the European Union. But today we see things in the European Union that we can be less proud of. And the rise of right-wing extremism is one of these. This is a problem that will not go away by itself. Of course, the economic crisis has a lot to do with it, but the problem will not disappear even if we get out of the crisis. It is for us to ensure that this problem is all the time on the agenda, and that's why it's so important that you organize this conference today and that you take a strong stand and that you have this very important project. I would like to tell you about an event that took place in the European Parliament the 27th of January this year. It was an evening to commemorate the liberation and the atrocities of Auschwitz. It was a very emotional evening. It was organized by President Schulz. Thank you for that. A lot of people were there, survivors, victims, and other people who have been active in the fight against Nazism and its followers. It was also a night where we gave a room named after Raoul Wallenberg, so it was very strong for me as a Swede to be there. In the beginning of the evening, there was a very moving film showed. It showed, in black and white, the horrors committed in the ghetto in Warsaw. Elderly survivors were in the movie as well, commenting the horrors and expressing their guilt, their sorrows, and their feelings and grief. Also guilt about being sometimes the last survivor of the family. We were all very touched by that movie. And later in the evening, there was another film showing young men marching in the street, harassing, beating, screaming to Romas. That movie was in color. It was from Hungary, 2012. In recent years, we have seen in many European countries a grim reminder of the threat that right-wing extremism has not gone. Let me just mention, as was mentioned by the President before, the attacks in Utøya and Oslo in Norway, the discovery of the National Socialist Underground here in Germany, and the serial killings of immigrants in Malmö in southern Sweden. They are just a few examples. And I'm deeply distressed that these examples are so easy to find. The situation in Hungary today is a disgrace to Europe. Seeing people in uniforms marching in the villages, frightening Romas, and having, as the President mentioned, members of parliament wanting to list Jews in 2012 for security reasons. And these are not isolated events. Such actions are, of course, unexcusable, but they form part of a pattern. Another country worth mentioning, and it has been mentioned already today, is Greece. The presence of a neo-Nazi party in the parliament cannot be ignored. I was in Athens only 10 days ago, and I was there at the same time it was discovered of the beating of a 14-year-old Afghan boy. And he was severely beaten. Maybe you have seen his photo in the newspapers all over the world. Investigations are still ongoing, of course, but his testimony says that it was a group of right-wing activism. I talked to the authorities in Athens about how the country handles migrants, refugees, and how they can prevent the rising right-wing extremism and the violence. Golden Dawn is a very violent movement. It attracts people around it who are violent. These are two countries. They're easy to mention, but the problem is much bigger. And I am really concerned about the mounting wave of harassment and violence targeting asylum seekers, migrants, ethnic and sexual minorities in many European countries. We see the development of Islamophobic, anti-Semitic, white supremacist ideology, intolerant and conducive to violence. We know how these extreme organizations feed off one another, try to create enmity, suspicion, and hatred between communities. And the activity of those groups are, of course, affected by the context of the wider world they operate in hand with the economic crisis, xenophobia has worsened. At the same time, politicians' willingness to speak confidently about the role of migrants in European society has diminished. I'm really uncomfortable to see today that mainstream politicians put the blame of all kinds of miseries on migration. There is a worrying lack of leadership today and a lack of political courage. I'm also concerned by the international reach and impact of right-wing extremism, increasingly operating between and across country borders. We see copycat violence. In Poland, there was a man recently arrested for planning to bomb the parliament building in Warsaw. He has allegedly been spied by the Norwegian far-right terrorist Anders Breivik. We also see internet, fantastic invention, of course, but it is also a tool for promoting extreme ideologies without being constrained by any borders at all. And this potential of violent extremism exists in all countries. It may manifest itself in different forms. It can be right-wing, left-wing, separatism, religiously motivated, or some other kind of extremism. But it leaves deep scars on society. And we need a new approach to this. We need better European and international cooperation to develop an understanding on how to solve the challenges presented by extremism. Cross-border exchange at the European level encourages innovation and would allow us to act faster. This must be at the heart of the European focus. So the question is, what can we do? Well, President Schulz has outlined a lot of issues that need to be addressed, but let me give you two more examples. Firstly, and there we agree fully, we need a very strong political leadership to condemn extreme violent acts and discourses. We need to refute the claims made by extremists and actively respond to them. The trial in Munich is one example that affords us the opportunity to reiterate our values: freedom of speech, freedom of worship, democracy, rule of law, equal rights, regardless of race, religion, and gender. Setting the direction of the debate, we also need to make a more positive dialogue on migration. Any society which gives way to populism and anti-immigration sentiments ignores the reality that we need migrants. They enrich and have in the past and will in the future our societies. If we forget that, if we appeal to populism rather than engaging with the real issues when we discuss migration and integration, we risk fading into a very dangerous rhetoric. Secondly, early intervention and prevention are the only long-term practical solutions to violent extremism. It is paramount to empower the civil society and take action at the grassroots level. We must support different initiatives which increase civil society's capability to tackle the issue. I'm talking about the practitioners and the volunteers who work on the ground. They are the best ones positioned to connect to people vulnerable to being drawn into extremist behavior and political violence. The Commission launched almost 1.5 years ago now the EU Radicalisation Awareness Network, RAN, and it aims to support Member States in finding better ways to counter violent extremism. This initiative facilitates the sharing of lessons between organizations and practitioners, community workers, youth associations, social workers, victims, teachers, academics, community police officers. And there are more than 500 experts all over Europe from all countries, and we have several from Germany in this network. And one of them, Mr. Harald Weinböck, will speak a little bit later in this conference. And I also had the possibility, just before I came here, to visit Exit Deutschland and to see how they help people who want to leave right-wing extreme groups. I was really impressed by the work that they do. The RAN network is about the community, about the local level, sharing practices, sharing good experiences, learning from each other, comparing different methodologies, and seeing how can we identify people and bring them out of these extreme environments. We had this January high-level conference in Brussels. Local experts from the network met with ministers from the Justice and Home Affairs area. And in the run-up to the meeting, several working groups presented different recommendations to the ministers. And one such very concrete policy proposal is to set up programs in all EU countries to help individuals to leave violent extreme groups, exit programs. Another one is to train local police all over Europe on how to spot early signs of violent behavior among suspects. Institutions, of course, have an important role here. Schools must be encouraged to engage with local actors, to use the materials and to challenge extremism in the classroom. The increasingly sophisticated use of internet and social media as a propaganda tool for violence and extremism adds another challenge. As a result of law enforcement investigation, a number of right-wing extremist internet forums initiating violence and attacks have been banned or shut down, including some of the most prominent German-language right-wing extremist forums. We need to develop counter-narratives, a response to those narratives who are there in the internet. And one of the groups in the RAN network is specifically concerned with this, internet and social media. How can we develop frontline partnership with the public, private and voluntary sector to collate, create and disseminate counter and alternative narratives? The focus on how internet and social media can be used to enhance the reach and impact of such narratives, incorporating efforts to promote a more critical online behavior among young people. And this includes using testimonials of victims and former activists or extremists. RAN has come a long way in its work, identifying an increasingly number of good practices and lessons learned. They now need to be shared widely. Some countries are quite advanced in this, others lag behind. Our intention is that the experiences will help in the design of new policy recommendations all over Europe, at local level, at national level, and at European level. And it is my intention to adapt a European counter-violent extremist programme before the end of the year. And this will include a range of very hands-on proposals for all levels and policy recommendations to be fed into the revision of the EU radicalisation strategy. It will hopefully help Member States and the European institutions to better counter violent extremism. But it's not enough, and that's when I come back to my first point. It needs a strong political leadership to support it. We need dedicated discussions at the highest level, meaning the heads of state and government at the European Council, leading up to a joint commitment on how we stop the growing trends of xenophobia, of violent extremism in Europe. I would strongly recommend that such a discussion should happen as soon as possible, at least within a year. Because the time to act is now. It is the silence of the good people that gives fertile ground to the bad people, as was said here before. We need to act now, not tomorrow, not when the economic crisis is over. The European Union is built upon shared values, fundamental rights, democracy. That's why we got the Nobel Peace Prize. And that's why each of us have the responsibility, I would say the moral obligation, to stand up for those rights. And today, in many places in Europe, they are threatened. So let us make a joint effort to do our part of it. And I want to thank the organisers for having this very important conference and for leading the political debate on this. Thank you very much.